Bryant?
All right, Jane, it's been more than 3 years now since the brutal murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Yet her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, are still trying to fight widespread suspicions they were somehow involved in her death. In an attempt to support their claims, the Ramseys, who have consistently refused to take lie detector tests for investigators, recently submitted to voluntary lie detector tests that were set up by their attorney, who publicly announced the results on Thursday as he chastised public suspicions.
These people have been on trial in the court of public opinion for over 3 years, but they have never been charged with a crime. A grand jury met for months and did not find the evidence sufficient to indict them. Yet the leaks and the lies have persisted. Books written, television shows, movies, putting these people on trial every day, convicting them of a crime they did not commit every night.
Frank Horvath's a criminal justice professor at Michigan State University and an expert on polygraph tests. He's in Okemos, Washington. Mr. Horvath, good morning.
Good morning, Bryant.
Professor, first off, this is inadmissible as evidence. As a general rule, how fallible are these kinds of polygraph tests?
Well, in my opinion, the evidence shows that examiners' decisions in the real world are probably around 90% accurate. But I should correct you, there is one state, and that's the state of New Mexico, where polygraph results are admissible just like all other scientific evidence.
In brief, how do these tests work? I mean, we all have this image from television, but how do these tests work?
What a polygraph does is just record physiological changes as people are being asked questions, in this case, for instance, relating to the death of JonBenet. The recordings are then interpreted by somebody who's been trained to do that. So in fact, there is no such thing as a lie detector. The examiner, that is the person who administers the polygraph examination, is the one who really makes the decision.
Would distance in time from an event skew the results?
I don't believe so, and I think most examiners would agree with me. There are quite a few cases that occur nationally where there are many years that transpire between the time of occurrence and the polygraph exam, and there doesn't seem to be any detrimental effect from it.
Do physical responses that are measured, are they lessened each time one takes the test?
If there is repeated testing, yes, people will habituate to the test, but that has to be done in periodic intervals in close succession to each other.
So by taking these tests, the Ramseys could inure themselves against further tests and taint further testing?
Well, if they took tests repeatedly, let's say 3 or 4 or 5 tests over a period of the next 2 weeks or so, then perhaps they might become habituated to the testing. But I don't think that's very likely to happen.
Let me ask you to stand by for a second while I go to Denver, where CBS News legal analyst Andrew Cohen is standing by. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning.
How do we know the Ramseys didn't just keep taking this test until they got the results they wanted?
We don't know that, Bryant. What we know from their lawyers yesterday is that they took a test in April that proved to be inconclusive. So they had to retest last week, and it was the test last week that they announced yesterday they passed.
The Ramseys have consistently refused to be tested by the Colorado authorities, by the FBI. I mean, should we be surprised that they passed their own organized lie detector tests?
No, not at all. We shouldn't be surprised. They bought and paid for it, and obviously they wouldn't have had a press conference yesterday heralding the news had they failed it. They felt they needed to do this because they're waging a public relations war. The test has very little legal significance. The Boulder officials already are saying they don't really care about it. They want to take their own tests. So the Ramseys feel this is all about public relations and less about the law. It doesn't help them legally. It doesn't move them outside of that umbrella of suspicion that the officials here have been talking about for about 3 years.
Yeah, it has no weight in the court of law. Does it have any weight then in the court of public opinion?
I think so. Perhaps already we're hearing that some people may have been moved by this news, but I think in Colorado and probably in the rest of the nation, there are 2 camps about this Ramsey case. There are people who believe that the Ramseys may have had something to do with the death of their daughter. There are people who firmly believe the opposite. I don't think this test changed the majority of those people. I think people who think that they may have done something probably are discounting the test. The people who think that they may have been involved or were not involved are pointing to the test and showing that they're innocent. So I don't think this moves the bubble a little bit, but the Ramseys thought it would. They hoped it would, and I think that's why they took the time and the effort and paid the money to take the tests.
Professor Horvath, they took a polygraph test before this one. Supposedly the results were inconclusive. How can they be inconclusive?
Sometimes people are overly anxious at the first time of the examination. Sometimes in a case like this, in particular, they're unfamiliar with the protocol that is involved in doing a polygraph examination. So I think sometimes that lack of familiarity with the process will lead to that kind of outcome.
All right, Andrew Cohen, so what happens next? Absent any startling new evidence, is this murder ever going to be solved?
That's exactly the way I would phrase it, Brian. Unless there's a confession, unless a new witness steps forward, unless technology changes and allows officials here to test this evidence again, we are at a standstill. There's a camp that believes the Ramseys may have been involved inside the DA's office. There's a camp that believes that an intruder committed the crime, and there is literally gridlock, and I don't think this test changes that.
All right, Andrew Cohen in Colorado and Professor Frank Horvath in Michigan. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
It's 7:07. Let's go on to the news desk now. Julie Chen's got a look at the rest of the headlines.